The title of the panel, Reforms in Mexico, is very wide. And given as well my limited capacity to speak on many topics, I will probably send my comments on some of the economics and trading policies that Mexico is following in order to remain competitive. Again, thank you very much for having the opportunity to be here. I see many familiar faces as well. I'm always very happy to be in Tijuana, San Diego, come here very often as well. And I have had the opportunity to work with most of you in many other issues as well. On behalf of the Secretary of the Economy, Alfonso Guajardo, my boss, Undersecretary Francisco Rosenzweig, who could not be here today with us, but sends his regards and instructed me to speak to you as frank as I can in these issues. No? Competitiveness. Well, competitiveness is always a word that is thrown just so much often without really people understanding what competitiveness is all about. Arnulfo was telling us about an angle of competitiveness that has to do with people. But clearly there are many other items that go in the competitiveness agenda. In the case of Mexico, competitiveness implies the ability to create and sustain a good business environment, to be able to attract investments, to be able to have companies starting and operating their businesses, creating jobs in the end. So competitiveness, when we translate the concept from the broad academic perspective to down-to-earth activities and policies, competitiveness in the end means making the lives of our populations better. So how do we do that from the economic and the trading perspective? First, we are very happy in Mexico about the way that things have turned in the past few months or years in terms of economic growth. 4% last year, looking good for 2013, good levels of investment. Foreign trade, which is something just so familiar to San Diego, Tijuana, reached almost $700 billion, a very important figure. Trade with the U.S., which is a main driver of what we do bilaterally, reached the astonishing figure of $500 billion last year. And I want you to pause for a moment and think and say the figure out loud. $500 billion a year. That's more than $1 billion a day. Try to picture what that implies, and you will see the opportunities that such trade has for Mexico and the U.S. Clearly, the NAFTA, there were some references to the NAFTA earlier, helped to unlock all this potential. But NAFTA is going to turn 20 next year. It's actually hard to picture that idea for those of you or those of us that were already around in those days. If a kid that had been born in 1993, 1994 is already going to college. So that's probably a good way to see how much time it has passed. Yet the trading environment that we are facing right now in the 21st century poses just as many challenges as we had back in 1993. The trade has become more complex. There are more countries participating in the trading activity worldwide. Many countries that a few decades ago were not as present as they are right now. China, Brazil, India, but also some other countries as South Africa and Eastern Europe are also playing a larger role these days. Clearly, trade has also become more complex in the sense of what it implies. Trade is no longer only about reducing tariffs and allowing for goods to cross the border freely. Trade is also now about the environment. It's also about labor. It's also about energy. It's also about regulatory cooperation. It's about state-owned enterprises. So the scope of what trade implies has become more complex. And countries such as Mexico and the U.S., or any country for that matter, has to adapt its own agenda to fit into those policies now. And finally, just something that has been made clear in this table over and over again, the competitiveness of Mexico now represents the competitiveness of the U.S., and if we take that concept even to a larger extent, it also means the competitiveness of the whole North American region, including Canada there as well. The idea of the NAFTA back in early 1990 the early 1990s, was to create a region that could be able to compete with other regions in the world. That hasn't changed. The only difference now is that the regions that we compete with are also becoming more complex. And I will take two examples in point. One of them being the negotiations that we are doing in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP. We are absolutely convinced that the TPP is going to change the rules of the game worldwide. Maybe because the situation with the WTO Doha development round is not going so well, and probably that's been optimistic. But we need to jumpstart the trade policy worldwide, and the TPP represents a fantastic vehicle to do so. Now, the way that the supply chains are integrated in North America makes the fact that Mexico, the U.S., and Canada, for that matter, interact and find synergies on the TPP front all too obvious. For those of you in your daily operations, you see that happening. From the policy perspective, we need to work on making that cooperation and those synergies happening as well. Now, the TPP, of course, as you know, represents a serious effort to link North America with the Asia Pacific. The Asia Pacific represents the region that is the fastest growing region in terms of economic development, but also the fastest growing region in terms of how many people live there, the resources that they wield, and the way that capitalism, if you wish, or the system that we live in is going to evolve in the next few years. And North America cannot afford the luxury to be left behind or be left out of such equation. We need to make sure that we are there to shape how things will be in the next few decades. The next round of the negotiations of the TPP are going to be held in Singapore in a few weeks from now. Mexico will be ready to participate and will be ready to work with the U.S. Last year, actually, there was a round of TPP negotiations held here in San Diego. Very successful, I understand. And the second point that I would make regarding how competitiveness goes through the coordination and the work in our trading agendas has to do with the announcement that the President Obama made recently in the State of the Union about the potential agreement between the U.S. and the European Union. We are thrilled by that idea. We have had, as you know, a trade agreement with the EU for the past 10 years or so, successful to some degree, but we are convinced that there is room to move on a more wider perspective, and we believe that any true transatlantic partnership between the U.S. and the EU should also include Mexico. We have a very strong history of promoting free trade. We chaired the G20 last year, where one of the topics that we put at the center of the agenda was the fight against protectionism and the fight to keep markets open. In our case, it's obvious when you see that close to 70% of our GDP comes from foreign trade. So for us, it's really a matter of creating economic conditions. It's not a rhetoric question to keep markets open and promote free trade. And we believe that's something that we, the U.S. and Mexico, should champion around the world. And you only need to see what happens in other countries, in other latitudes, to see that it's not theory. It is happening. So we should be very concerned because of that. So the possibilities that Mexico sees in our trading policy with the U.S. abroad, being the TPP and potentially the European Union, go hand in hand with what we do internally in North America to remain competitive. Every single piece of competitiveness that we may have or that we may gain through agreements and so on just goes through the window when we have to wait 5 hours at the border to cross. That's true, and it's something that we have known for many years now, and we need to keep working on that. There's been a substantial amount of work put together binationally in the past 2 years to increase the competitiveness of our border. I have always said, and some of you have heard me saying this before, that the border should be the point where our two countries meet, not the line that divides Mexico and the U.S. So in order to exploit all these opportunities, whether that is shipments coming from Asia and docking in our ports to get the goods across the borders and benefiting our consumers, or whether that is inputs that our companies are going to transform in goods that then we export to other third markets, for any of those reasons, we need to keep a very open and a very effective and well-run border. I have always expressed my strong appreciation for the work that Tijuana and San Diego Council chambers and businessmen have done to keep that idea on the forefront of the agenda. I have always also used the example of you and your companies in other points of the border, whether that is Laredo or Ciudad Juarez or so on, to create precisely those links. We will continue to do so under the initiative of the 21st Century Border, that is a program run by the U.S. and Mexican governments. We are working on the part of the infrastructure, which is crucial, as we already mentioned, but also in terms of promoting new and innovative ideas, such as the pre-clearance programs and such as the use of ready lanes, global entry, and similar programs that allow for travelers, for secure and trusted travelers, to go back and forth with really the minimum interruption, or as minimum interruption as possible. But to continue feeding that process, we need to have the input of the private sector. We need to have the ideas and the participation in fora such as this important one to keep having ideas that we will then translate into concrete actions. So I would ask you for your continued support and your continued engagement in doing this. The Department of Commerce, my friends in the Department of Commerce in Washington, and the Ministry of the Economy constantly run a program of outreach in different cities along the border. This year will be no exception. This year we're also trying to put a little tweak on what we do by expanding the outreach exercises that we do, not only to the border, but also to some inner states that probably those states are not physically close to the border, and yet they have a very strong relationship with the border because of what they produce and what they send to the border and so on. Coordinating, for example, with the companies in the state of Querétaro or in the state of Wyoming or what have you, may probably help us, decongest the border and make sure that things run smoothly there with the support of those states. So we're going to do that as well this year. We will continue asking for the support of the private sector. And I will close with this particular comment, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have. The competitiveness is also something that we need to stand up and publicly demand, not ask, demand. And that goes by having the relevant actors saying the truth about what's happening between Mexico and the U.S. I just mentioned that NAFTA is going to turn 20 next year. That should be a very historical, important landmark for all of us. Yet I know, and I'm certain, that just like in any other public idea that is, I guess, has different views to different people, there are going to be some people questioning the legacy of what we have done and the legacy of the NAFTA and questioning the results. To me, $500 billion a year are a very strong and important result that should be speaking by itself. Yet, I could not undermine the strong push, the strong support that voices such as yours could have in the public opinion when defending what we have achieved. In any case, and it's been already mentioned, the enormous opportunity that we have of having two administrations in the U.S. and Mexico starting almost at the same time, this should be a moment where, taking back from what we have achieved in the past 20 years, we build to what we were going to have in the next 50 or 60 or 70 years. When we look back in many years from now at the state of our relationships, we should be able to say that it was on this particular moment at the outset of the 21st century that we lay the foundations of what we are going to have and what our children are going to have. And that could only be the result of our decisions today, and may that be as well that turns out in North America being, as we like to put it, the most competitive region in the world. Thank you.
Well, we knew when we put this panel together that it was going to be outstanding, but it's already exceeded my expectations, which were quite high, and we haven't even gotten to Ambassador Lay, so this is terrific. I do want to, before we ask the Ambassador for his comments, I do want to highlight First of all, the fact that the first two speakers brought up two different topics, but that are so integrally related in terms of the overall competitiveness agenda. And I think that was a very effective presentation of both of you in terms of different aspects of competitiveness. But the other thing, and speaking essentially back to Washington, the idea that the United States would move forward into a trade negotiation with the European Union, which I personally support, I think is astounding that we would think about doing that without Canada and Mexico, precisely for the reasons you laid out. But also, we've just gone through this exercise in terms of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, where Canada and Mexico were not included at the beginning and had to be brought in later, and have already proven effective partners in the process. And people in Washington say, wow, why didn't we know this before? Well, many of us were saying it, and all of you have been effective advocates too, but my appeal to Washington, and I've been public about this even before the State of the Union, is don't repeat the mistake of TPP. Let's have Canada and Mexico at the table right from the very beginning. Mexico has an agreement with the EU already. Canada is in the process of concluding one. I mean, you can't have better partners, in my view, than that, and particularly in the context of a production chain that is fully integrated in North America. And it would be actually more difficult to conclude an agreement bilaterally with Europe than to conclude a trilateral North American agreement. I mean, how do you, and we can go into this in the question and answers, but how do you talk about a U.S.-made automobile? It does not exist. I mean, there's North American-made automobiles, or there are North American-made products. And so trying to disaggregate manufactured products in the context of a trade relationship with Europe is much more difficult even than just moving forward as a North American unit. So thank you very much. Those were important comments in my view. Ambassador Lay, you have a great deal of experience as ambassador. You have spent much of your career in Asia, China specifically. You have a wealth of information and perhaps a slightly different but related perspective. I'd like you to make your comments, and also to the extent you have ideas about now as an outside observer, not with the government, but what are the prospects for some of these changes that we've talked about and some that we haven't talked about?
Well, thank you very much, Eric, and thank you very much for this invitation, especially to Charles for inviting me to be part of this panel. And of course, I see many, many familiar faces over here that I have met all my years of being member of the board of the Institute of the Americas. Well, yes, I have many, many hats, but one of the hats is being a member of COMSE. I have the chair for Asia Pacific in the COMSE, which is the private sector dealing with foreign trade in Mexico. And I have, of course, an opinion and of what the private sector of Mexico think. And I will take a talk today with that hat in hand. To a certain extent. Also, I will have also my own opinions on what's going on. There is a well-deserved optimism among the private sector of Mexico towards the program of reforms presented by President Peña Nieto lately. And I think that those old reforms, of course, will deal to a grade of competitiveness for Mexico. And among them, the most important ones, of course, have already taken place. One of those was the labor reform. The second important one, or I do not know if there is first one or second one, but the education reform that will increase enormously the competitiveness of Mexico. What we have had until now presents a tremendous disadvantages for my country in order to be competitive with the rest of the world. Seeing what other societies in the other side of the Pacific have done, and in terms of development, I think that one of the key factors for that development, rapid development, has been the educational factor. Then what we have right now presented, or the President administration has presented as a key reform of his government, I think that the private sector of Mexico is really delighted to hear for that. But also, there are two key reforms pending that will be presented that will come to the discussion, national discussion, and will be presented soon to the legislature of Mexico, which is the fiscal and, of course, the energy reform. All those two reforms will be key factors for increasing the competitiveness of Mexico. Why fiscal? Because right now, the money that the government gets from taxes is really very low. 12% of the GDP of Mexico is what the government gets in order to spend in all their programs. If the present administration has such an ambitious program of reforms, and I think that are really necessary in a practical way in order to set the foundation for a developed country that we want to be Mexico. We need money, and that money has to come from taxes, and there has to be a fiscal reform urgently needed. And I think that the private sector of Mexico is well concerned and knows that there has to be such a reform, even though to many companies will hurt a little bit in their pockets. But I think that it will be needed in order to have far more income from other areas. And of course, the energy. If we do not reform in the energy sector, we won't be really competitive in this world. Because other countries have done reforms in the energy sector, has a energy sector that there is open to companies that are really profiting of that sector. If we do not have fair prices for the energy we are consuming, we won't be really competitive in the world, and we are not competitive anymore. Then I think that with all those plans of reforms that the present administration has presented, really the private sector of Mexico will back all of them and are really enthusiastic about what the present administration is doing. But also I want to refer to foreign trade. And then Juan Carlos has mentioned quite clearly what are the aims of the TPP, and also what the aims will be for Mexico in case of a negotiation that goes through a free trade agreement with the European Union. The private sector of Mexico, of course, is very well aware that we cannot afford to be left out of the TPP. We are in such a way integrated into North America that if we we are not part of that negotiation of the TPP. We will be left out of a tremendously important manufacturing portion of the North American integrated manufacturing hub. But also we have to be aware that the TPP won't open the doors of the largest markets of Asia. Never, because I am pretty sure that China will remain out of this agreement, which is one of the largest markets of Asia. India will be out of course, of this agreement. Japan, I think that we have a free trade agreement with Japan. Well, not a free trade agreement, but a economic cooperation with that country that favors the trade with Mexico, and it has been working quite well, progressively and has been doing quite well. Then if the Japan joins the TPP or do not join the PPP, for Mexico is not a tremendous advantage. But Indonesia, I don't think that ever will join the TPP in the conditions that are set up right now, because it won't be able to accept that all the negotiations are done and then later on being invited, neither China. And then the largest market of Asia will be out of that. But we cannot afford to be out of the negotiation. And of course, regarding the future negotiations with Europe, the private sector of Mexico, of course, will back whatever if we are invited to be part of the negotiation, because as Juan Carlos mentioned quite clearly, we are part again of that manufacturing hub of North America, very much integrated, and then whatever the negotiation with that region of the world, the United States, our main partner in North America, is doing, we have to be part of it, and we hope really to be invited to be part of that. And of course, I think that Canada will also be invited and be a real partner in the future. Regarding nearshoring, I think that it is important also for Mexico to be taken into account because we are really quite competitive right now and will be far more competitive in the future if all those reforms goes forward. But nearshoring, it's a window of opportunity that if we do not take into account and we do not act rapidly, that window will close. Why? Because wages in Mexico will increase, but it is not only wages, but many other opportunities. Many other countries in the world are doing reforms as well. Not only Mexico, but many other countries, Vietnam, I do not know, probably in the future, Zimbabwe or Bangladesh, and all those countries will be the competitors of Mexico if we do not do the reforms. Then we have to if we do our job. We hope that that window of opportunity, we take it very rapidly, and we take advantage of that. And once the nearshoring is completed, or once the nearshoring is done, we have to look forward also how to anchor all those industries that come to manufacturing in Mexico. And how to anchor them is to create the cluster of national suppliers and reduce the imports that we are doing right now. The maquiladora industry still lacks a national integration. Most of the maquiladora industry in Mexico imports 90% of their supplies. Then, with that facility that the maquiladora industry in the past moved outside to other countries, with that facility also will move if we do not do that integration. Then we have to complete the program of nearshoring with a real policy, a very effective policy by the government to bring the cluster of suppliers to Mexico in order to integrate those industries. That will reduce the capacity of those industries to move abroad, and also will create a virtuous circle of creating more jobs in Mexico, and also creating more income for the government with the taxes that will be paid. Then we have to take into account that and move as I said, very rapidly in order to anchor those industries in our shores. That will be the real nearshoring for us. Regarding competitive with United States, yes, we have a very virtuous circle that here. The United States has the capital to invest. We have the manpower to manufacture, but we also have the human capacity to be able to manufacture in a very competitive prices. Then I think that we can create the most competitive region in the world, integrating that border that right now divides us into a really, as mentioned by Arnulfo and by Carlos, a real integration point instead of a separating point. And with this, I want to stop with my comments and be able to answer whatever questions are posed in later on. Thank you.
Sergio, thank you very much for your intervention. I think those were also very important comments. We started this panel a little bit late, so we're going to run it a little bit late. So we have plenty of time, frankly, to bring all of you into the conversation, and that's what I'd like to do now. But before I begin to call on people, I should take note of the fact that COMSE, for many years, was a partner, as Sergio knows, with the Council of the Americas in the context of the U.S. Mexico Business Committee. Mm-hmm. The Council of the Americas was the Secretariat for the United States. COMSE was the Secretariat for Mexico, and so our partnership goes for many, many years, and it has been a very productive one as well. There's a lot of information on the table now. 3 different perspectives, all related, but somewhat different, and so I'm going to dispense of my own questions because I want to go right to yours. To the extent that the question is directed toward a specific panelist, please feel free to do so, and we would appreciate as well if you could introduce yourself by name and perhaps organization, if that's convenient for you, just so we can have a sense of which direction the question is coming from. Let's take a couple questions in the first round. We'll go here, here, and here.
Buenos días, Enrique Morones, Border Angels. This is for Dr. Valdivia. Dr. Valdivia, as you know, I was on the first commission of the Institute of Mexicans Abroad, and I formed and chaired the Border Commission. So my question is, what is the status of the vote in the exterior? Of those of us that are Mexican first, even though we were born here, like in my case, very proud to be Mexican and proud to be a U.S. citizen. But so, what's the status of the people being able to vote here in the United States in Mexican elections? And the other comment is to Mr. Baker. You mentioned the billions of dollars in successful trade between the 3 great countries of North America because of NAFTA. But rarely do we hear the thousands of people that have died as a result of NAFTA. And it would be great if, when we talk about NAFTA, we also pay our respects to the more than 10,000 people that have died that are economic migrants leaving Mexico to come to the United States to be able to put food on their tables. I think that also should always be mentioned. So those are the two comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Question right here, please.
I've got a question relative to very specific. Toyota is a large manufacturer of trucks in Ducati. And in terms of global competitiveness, Toyota's going to need to get the railroad working from San Diego through Ducati, north down to the east to tie into the Union Pacific. And and this is such a relatively important part of global competitiveness. I just think that I'm not sure if anybody wants to address it, but it's just kind of a statement.
Thank you. The question, and it's a broader question too, in terms of just infrastructure and the ability to make this vision work physically. And this is a very important question. Question here, please.
Thank you. Mario Lopez, Director of Financial Affairs for the city. To Juan Carlos, about 2 years ago, in one of the regional trips that we did to Mexico City from the San Diego, Tijuana, Chambers of Commerce and so on, we talked about this idea of the 21st Century Border Initiative and the lack of stakeholder input in that process. And you mentioned that the region needs to demand it, that the region needs to talk about the successes of NAFTA, and yet, again, 2 years later, there's no clear mechanisms for stakeholder input into that process of the border. And then that 21st Century Initiative is headed by the Anti-Narcotics Office within the White House on the U.S. side. So just having that agency or that office head this effort of the border tells you about sort of the interest from the level of federal government. So just wanted to, if you could mention about that. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to take one more question in this round, and hopefully we'll have time to get to a second round here, please, and then we'll go to the panelists for responses.
My name is Malin Burnham. I've been saying what I'm going to mention for the last 2 years and can't seem to get any traction, and I'm very inspired by what I'm hearing from this panel. If our three countries were a private business, we would have a marketing plan. North American Competitiveness does not have a marketing plan. I propose that our three governments put at least $100 million on the table and start marketing our competitiveness to the world. Manufacturing opportunities, travel, investment, culture, natural resources. We're not doing that. All we're doing is having some rifle shots, and we need a big shotgun out there to announce to the world, bring them to the three countries. And I think our federal governments have to get together and commit a relatively small amount of money each and market.
Yeah, these are four very interesting comments and questions. And let me start, since the first question was directed toward Arnolfo, let me ask him to weigh in, and then we'll move down the table. Juan Carlos, there are some questions directed to you, and then I'll ask Sergio Ley to offer his insights as well.
Thank you, Eric. Enrique, you're very right. I think that the issue of political rights is a requirement. It's a prerequisite for any attempt to achieve what I called before binational citizenship. I mean, if their own country cannot give Mexicans the right to enjoy their rights, their political rights, because our law allows for that, and it's really the administrative part that has not helped that. I mean, the reason why we don't issue the IFE here, the credencial para votar here, is not an issue. It's not that it's forbidden by law. It's that it's too expensive. That's really the which I think it's a lame excuse. What I have to say about that is that the IFE is already working on a experts panel. It was established last February the 5th to explore ways to issue the credencial here, the IFE card here, and to explore easier ways, cheaper ways to vote rather than the postal vote that we had this time. And just Saturday, and that was the reason why I was here, I had a meeting in which I was able to bring together Ana Gabriela Guevara, who's our senator and head of the Migration Committee, Amalia Garcia, diputada, who is the head of the Migration Committee of the Cámara, the other one is the Senate, and 10 legislators, along with the IFE, working together to see how that works. And just let me add something else, Eric, because I think it's the right space to do it. And taking off a little bit my hat of the Institute for Mexicans Abroad, I'm putting on my hat as someone who has been in the project of President Peña Nieto for 17 years, working towards where we are right now. I think I have the right to mention a few of the things concerning the other reforms, because I just realized that our panel is called the Reform Agenda in Mexico, and I was talking about Mexicans abroad, which are a very important part of the agenda, but not the only one. And just to add to what our great friend Ambassador Ley just mentioned, the ideas or the spirit behind the reforms in Mexico are two ways. We have to create first economic growth, and we have to create an internal market. And if those two things work together, then we will have a country that will converge towards where our North American partners are today. So, very importantly, there's three huge things that have happened in Mexico in the last 2 months, and that I think we have to realize how big they are. Because it took, for many years, we couldn't pass a labor reform, and the labor reform was passed. And for many, many, many years, it was said that an educational reform could not be passed because of the union, and it was already passed. And we have a third thing, which is El Pacto por México, which is this agreement that the three parties and the chambers and the federal government signed, putting together all the things that we agree on and that we will push together. And those things cannot be understated. For the first time again, because we had heard over and over again that Mexican democracy was non-functional, was dysfunctional, and that our democracy had brought about stagnation and struggle instead of cooperation towards progress. And I think Pacto por México, in a way, makes up for that and really answers to that. So the three reforms, or the reforms that Ambassador Ley mentioned, which are fiscal and energy, are definitely two of the reforms that, along with competition reform, that not only President Peña Nieto, but the Pacto por México have committed themselves to, that is the backbone of what we see as a stronger economic growth. And that will have to be, in a way, aggregated to the impact that future reforms in this respect would have, like a banking and stock market reform in order to promote better financing and the financing of small and medium-sized enterprises. So better financing is another reform that is there, is not one of the top ones, but is going to be there in the future. And the other part, which is creating an internal market, what we see that has to happen is three important reforms. Of course, fiscal reform has to do with creating a better distribution of wealth. Importantly, competition also has to do with that. I mean, it goes into also creating better access to products. But finally, and importantly, Social Security reform. President Peña Nieto committed himself, and again, in the Pacto por México, the Social Security reform is there. And what is the Social Security reform? Well, it would have to do with four basic social insurances, or seguros sociales. It would have to do with unemployment. It would have to do with health insurance. It would have to do with retirement, and it would have to do with work-related risks. So those would be the four big areas in which we would be seeking universal reach of those things. So again, and I will finish this, and I'm sorry I went into this part, but I thought it was very important to say these things in a panel called, the Reform Agenda in Mexico, that the main idea behind this is creating growth and internal market, and then rounding it up with something that I didn't mention, which was political reform, which will then come turn. So I hope that is something that helps discussion.
No, I think very much it does. It helps us frame what is the overall approach to the government. So thank you for taking the time to lay that out. No, I think that was very helpful. And so Juan Carlos, over to you. Although I would like to perhaps add my own question to those that have already been here, and building on what you just said, Arnolfo, that is a tremendously big agenda addressing some tremendously big issues, which, as you yourself said, and I totally agree, in some cases have been untouchable for years, generations. education reform, labor reform, energy reform. These are the third rails of Mexican politics. And so the idea that the new administration is taking them on at once, I think, is in one way tremendously exciting, but the risk politically is huge, no? And so maybe we get and I'm not Mexican, obviously, and I don't, but as an outside observer, these things are very important that they pass, that they move through. And yet there are the politics that one has to take note of. But thank you for that was a very, very good and wise intervention. Juan Carlos, please.
Yes, thank you. Well, certainly, thank you for your questions. It's always very refreshing to hear points of view. I'll try to address them simultaneously. In the case of the infrastructure that we need at the border, clearly it's a matter, and it's also related to the part of the stakeholder interaction that we have. One of the situations that we have when speaking about the border is that for every single point along the border, the most important possible project is their project. So when we speak about, when we talk with people of Tijuana, or when we talk with people of Ciudad Juarez, or even smaller places, I will not mention any one in particular because then, make it sensitive. But and it's true. I mean, for those communities, really, the project that they have for the ports of entry is absolutely crucial, and I don't want to disregard that in any way, shape, or form. But clearly, it's something that we need to prioritize. It's something that we need to be mindful that it's not possible to have an unlimited amount of resources to do everything at once. Now, and I think that Mayor Fellner touched upon this a little bit in his intervention earlier this morning. Now, regarding that particular railroad track in Tecate, I'm not fully aware of the details, but clearly the point that you are mentioning, or the larger point that I take from your comment, is that we need to see how it is important to link the economic feasibility with the potential results that we're going to get for each of those projects, and then move in that direction. That goes, of course, hand in hand with the interaction that we have with the stakeholders. I have a different view regarding the impact that the initiative has or may have, depending on who's running it. I think that also Ambassador Negroponte touched upon this in the morning as well. The balance between striking a good deal between security and trade promotion is always challenging, and we need to make sure that we get that right, because it's just too costly to not to do so. Now, you're absolutely right. There isn't a formal mechanism established to get the input of the stakeholder, at least not in the sense of what you could probably see, in terms of publishing something in the Federal Register or in the Diario Oficial in Mexico and appointing council people and making sure that goes as probably we would like to. But you can count on the personal assurances of the Secretaría de Economía. There are no officials from the Department of Commerce here with me, but I will speak for them as well. And I can assure you that they will be with us as well in the outreach of the public stakeholders that we have. Clearly, because of what I'm saying, that there are tons and hundreds of thousands of priorities, we need to be very selective about those. And we are here, the Economía and to some degree commerce as well, we are here to help filter those and make sure that the ones that are important and the ones that are very crucial to do, all of them are. But again, what I'm saying, we are limited in terms of resources to make their way through the action plans that we're doing. And again, it's a lengthy process. Maybe we're not moving as far as we would like. That's always something that we acknowledge and that we are committed to improve. But we are doing everything we can, and you can see some of those efforts in the ports of entry that we have opened. Recently, a year and a half ago, we're talking about projects in Dona, in Rio Bravo, even here in Tijuana. With all the situations that we recently saw a few months ago, yet the fact remains that there are works on the making. No? And all these translated to what would be a marketing plan for North America. Well, that's a fantastic idea. I will buy in immediately on that idea. It is happening, I guess, but in a way that is more spontaneous rather than driven by a specific objective. No, I've seen some examples, some very worthy examples of industries marketing themselves as the North American fill-in-the-blank industry. They are also presenting projects or presenting even some academic work in fora such as the OECD and some others, and they are labeling themselves as the North American industry. And I think that's a fantastic idea. It really breaks the mold of the way that we conceptualize, or what I sometimes like to call the North American mindset that we need to develop, that goes really beyond NAFTA as such, but rather than the North American mindset, and goes through having same approaches to certain industries, certain regulations, even people. My own personal case, my father is an American citizen, yet I was born in Mexico, and I work for the Mexican government. I've been living in the two countries I've lived in both countries, and I feel very comfortable in any of those two. And we're going in that direction. I guess that the challenge is, or the question is, whether we want to do it as part of a marketing program that we are driven, that we are setting with particular objectives in mind, or whether it's just happening and we will have to adapt as we go by the same project. No, my own personal fault. I apologize for that. But just as Arnulfo was mentioning, the Pacto por México, the Pact for Mexico, it's an outstanding tool of what we have agreed collectively in Mexico to work on and to accomplish. If you are not familiar with that, I would invite you to look at it. It's in the webpage of the Presidencia de la República. But just as we are underscoring the importance of what we are discussing in this table and the importance of competitiveness, there is a whole axis, therefore. One of them, number 2, I believe, is entirely devoted to competition and the promotion of economic competitiveness. And it touches upon matters of competition, antitrust, changing laws, and many other aspects that, as Arnulfo was saying, not too long ago it was even taboo to speak about. Now we are taking on the challenges because it's obviously necessary to do so, but also because we feel that it's about the right time that we do it. No, and it goes as well in other areas. It makes this interaction or this linking that we're making, where competitiveness goes beyond one simple concept. For example, it's clearly acknowledged in the Pacto that we need to invest in science, and we need to invest in technology, and we need to invest in education. There's a commitment to invest 1% of the GDP in those areas in the next few years. So take a look at it in case you haven't, and I'm pretty sure that you will find it very compelling.
Thank you very much. We only have about 2 minutes left, Sergio, and I apologize for that. But let me give you the last word of a comment or two based on the questions or discussion we've just been having. And we'll let you have the last word.
Well, it is always a tremendous. But let me tell you, I will make comment on both reforms. Precisely, Arnulfo mentioned a very ambitious reform. As you said also, Eric, the present administration is engaged in a very ambitious reform. One of those ambitious reforms is the social reform, social security reform. But for that, you need money. And money will come with a fiscal reform. And also, will come also from a energy reform, not related, but to a certain extent interrelated. Because if an effective energy reform is conducted, Pemex or the government will liberate tremendous amount of money that right now is employed in subsidizing the gas and the gasoline and also other fuels. Then if that money is liberated, we will be able to invest that money into social security and other programs like, for instance, infrastructure that are badly needed in Mexico. Then for that, the most important, I think, reform of all of them will be the fiscal. If there is no fiscal reform, all other reforms are at risk of not being implemented. Thank you very much. Great.
No, those were terrific comments. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please join me in thanking the panel for the outstanding insight. I believe we have a short break now. Please come back shortly.